I think Wu-Tang said cash rules everything around me.
The hardest challenge is adoption. Surgeons and hospitals are cautious. They don't want to disrupt the workflows they already have unless the value for the patient and the value for their pocket, for their checkbooks is clear. That means a startup has to do more than just prove their safety and efficacy. They have to prove that the product improves outcomes, saves time in the OR, and really reduces cost.
To me, obviously, it feels like the tail wagging the dog, where the transition to better technology is being held up by checks, notes, inventory considerations.
Your focus is on value. You're saving money. No matter what, you have less implants to sterilize. You have less storage cost. And in addition, these implants, a lot of the time nowadays, because they're 3D printed, they can cost less.
I'm sold. I'm sold.
The reason we're all in medicine and the reason we're all in patient care is because we want to improve patients' lives as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Like, people don't like change. Like, I've said this a million times, like the only people that like change are wet babies.
I was always told by my parents, by my teachers, by my coaches, do it right the first time, you won't have to do it again.
I heard from a distributor the other day, they were like, yeah, we've got these hospitals and health systems are going to, moving from trying to consolidate down to 5 vendors for everything. It's like, good gosh.
One of my professors, Dr. Hung, Columbia University, studied tissue engineering forever. And he taught me something that was absolutely shocking. And every single person in the class was shocked. It was...
Hey everyone, Spencer Jones here, founder at Medtech and host of the Medtech Innovation Podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you've been around the musculoskeletal space enough, you've probably seen a lot about patient-specific implants. There was recent IPOs on this, but the concept of taking patients, imaging of their anatomy and then building custom implants that are perfect matches, perfect fits for them is a really hot topic, and that's what we dive into in depth today. I was joined by Jonathan Swill. He is an amazing wealth of knowledge on this space. He's the principal consultant at Surgical Excellence Partners. And what are you going to learn today? We dive into the ins and outs of the patient-specific implant market, what the small companies are doing, what the big companies are doing, and not just on the manufacturing side, right? Like the process by which they're doing these things and where there are divergences in terms of translating that imaging all the way to that end product of the patient-specific implant. We talk about the intersection of AI and robotic surgery as it relates to patient-specific implants. We get into and unpack a really interesting debate about mechanical alignment versus kinematic alignment and kind of the influencing factors there, as well as a lot of talk about commercialization, commercial strategy, launching in the US, and how to increase your chances of success of getting your medtech device, your medical technology adopted in hospitals and having successful launches. And honestly, the role that insurance and reimbursement and contracts and all that play in it. So it's really, really interesting. This was a really good pod. We actually went long just because there was so much good stuff to unpack. And just a little bit more about Jonathan. He's got, a decade of experience in orthopedic innovation. He studied at Hospital for Special Surgery, biomechanics, biosystems, biomedical engineer by training, got his MBA in healthcare from Columbia. Crazy, awesome, smart dude. Spent some time at some robotics startups and then some patient-specific implant startups. And honestly, fascinating guy, wealth of information, wealth of knowledge. You're going to love this podcast, especially if you're a musculoskeletal nerd like I am. So without further ado, let's get into the pod. Jonathan, thank you for joining the pod. Really excited to have you on today. I know we talked, I think months ago, and then, we got you into the Medtech community. And I think your journey, your background at so many things were really fascinating. And so I was even after the first time we talked, I was we got to get Jonathan on the pod. But, for the audience, Jonathan Swill, principal consultant at Surgical Excellence Partners. Jonathan, would love if you could maybe start us off by just telling the audience a little bit about yourself and, what gives you energy, what you like to do, and kind of how it relates to medtech.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it, Spencer. Thanks for having me here. I would say that I live, breathe orthopedic innovation. My career has been all about pushing the boundaries of how we treat a musculoskeletal disease. I want to start early on. I graduated undergrad from the University of Florida with a degree in biosystems, biomedical engineering. While I was there, our local hospital there, Shands Hospital, it's a really great orthopedic department. I was doing shadowing and doing research on aging and genetics. This was the first spark in my orthopedic world. I then did an internship as a research assistant in HSS, the Hospital for Special Surgery, Manhattan, and that pretty much changed everything for me. I worked as a biomechanical engineering researcher, studying hip and knee implants and their failure mechanisms. this is what really pulled me into the patient specific world, because I was seeing the failures. But what was really special about HSS is a lab is that they also have a customs department. So I was seeing the failures of these off the shelf parts, and also seeing the successes that they were having in the customs department. And this really opened my eyes to the value in patient specifics. From there, I started working in R&D and test engineering in both medtech and robotics. While I was there, I earned my MBA in healthcare administration, focused on medtech and commercialization to try to get that business background.
Yeah.
I really learned how technology translates to a real product and how you commercialize not just a medical device, but also just a product in general. And then I branched out and I decided I want to get my technical degree much stronger, technical skills much stronger. Went back to Columbia, got my master's in biomechanics in their biomedical engineering department. And then I started at CustomEd as a director of global markets, where I was doing everything from V&V also to trying to create a global commercialization strategy for this company that had developed a software that automated the design of surgical guides as a direct output for a surgical plan. That's where I was like, this is my, the beginning of my dreams come true, and being able to bring implants and patient-specific solutions to the orthopedic world.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always love like hearing people's kind of the moment when they discovered or realized like, this is what I'm like meant to do. You know what I mean? I loved healthcare and being a nurse and whatnot. And I, thought I was going to do anesthesia, but it really didn't take long, like of me getting into the medical device world, where I was like, I feel like I'm built for this. Like, this is what, and of course it's a lot of like, nature versus nurture, right? It's like, you're in the right place. Like you were at HSS, right? And that developed, but like always when you find people that are truly passionate about and talented at doing something that they really enjoy doing, it's always just like fun to see those things transpire.
Absolutely. And I think I don't think I would be, in the state that I'm in without that experience at HSS and without that exposure to all those really high class, top of the field surgeons, being able to do their grand rounds with them and seeing, the different problems that they were solving. And in the end, I'm no longer with CustomEd, and I ended up founding my own consulting company. It's called Surgical Excellence Partners, and we're helping bring innovative medtech. Specifically, my focus is on personalized medicine. In general, I love orthopedics, and I really find companies in that field to bring them into the U.S. market. And I really handle the regulatory strategy, market positioning, commercialization, and adoption. Adoption is my key, because I think that's the hardest part of everything. You can get a regulatory strategist, you can get, your market positioned, but unless you get that adoption, you're not going anywhere. And I think a really important thing for me that I'm doing, a project that I started, was a podcast of my own called Unstandardized Built for One, where my focus, it's kind of an info series, I would say, about the history of orthopedics in the light of personalized medicine, in the light of personalized surgery, in trying to promote patient-surgeon understanding of the need for moving more towards patient specifics in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we'll link the pod in the show notes as well, so people can go listen. So, it is interesting though, like you kind of came, I would say a bit, like I know HSS has like a really, at least in my mind, like a unique position in terms of being both academic and research focused, but also like clinical practice and innovation focused from like a product standpoint. But nonetheless, like still interesting to me, kind of the biomechanical engineering research, and then transitioning to that kind of like strategic market development and more on the commercial side. So like what's been, maybe like an interesting part of that journey from more of kind of like the research to the commercial side, or like maybe like what's the most surprising thing you've learned about, commercializing these types of technologies?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. So in general, the idea behind a point of care lab has come about over the last 10 years, where you have hospitals being able to commercialize a product internally, and I would say democratize a lot of their solutions. So a step in that direction in orthopedics was when HSS brought in Lima, brought in the ProMade, and they brought in their lab. Unfortunately, I don't think the timing was perfect, because it was right before, if not during COVID. So they weren't able to unlock that amazing talent and be able to bring patient-specific solutions right away to every patient that needed it. And I think it's slowly building, and they're slowly growing, and I think it's going great. But that idea behind taking a product from the lab, from the research department, and commercializing it is something that I find extremely valuable, especially for research hospitals like HSS, or I know Mayo Clinic is very big on it. And just these large hospitals being able to not necessarily cut out the big companies who have a history of falling short in R&D and actually bringing about innovation, but you see their clinical need. They're the closest people to the clinical issues. And so they're the fastest people who can say, identifying the clinical issue and moving more to the solution as fast as possible. I think that there's no better situation, and there's no more ripe position than inside the hospital to solve the problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, and point well taken. And I agree on like the large legacy players, like not having the same or not having maybe like the best kind of resource allocation or view of R&D, and things become more about stock price than they do other things, right? But I also think too, like one maybe like sign of what you were kind of describing too, it's like I've seen a lot of really interesting early stage technologies and even like platform technologies in the tech transfer setting with universities that really struggle because of that like proximity problem, like you're talking about. Like they're in a lab, in the, down the street research facility of the university, and they're still just like, even if they have a clinical advisor or whatever, they're still just so far away from like that like clinical practice. And proximity is the only word it's like coming to mind, right? Like, are you?
It's physical.
Like,
it's physical proximity, but there's also barriers as well.
Yeah, and it's hard to break through those barriers if you're not on the inside, and it's hard to get high fidelity and consistent exposure, right, when you're not like in the building, in the belly of the beast.
And it's interesting because, there's people like ProMade, which is doing, they've been now in HSS for, I don't know, I think anywhere between 4 and 5 years. And again, it's not, I wouldn't say that it's something that's really taken off as fast and as broad as I initially thought when I first, learned about it and got excited about it. Companies like Rico as well, Rico 3D in healthcare, all they're doing is trying to spread the word and spread the idea behind point of care labs and open up point of care labs all over the US. Inside hospitals, and like you just said, get in the belly of that beast. And that's a first step towards democratizing, having a commercial company allow a hospital to democratize a lot of their, patient specific solutions, but also just patient solutions as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like something I learned about healthcare, I'm like still learning even more and more. And like going through healthcare, whether it's like my wife having a kid and going through kind of that whole process within healthcare, or like working with like entrepreneurs that have like, technologies for prior authorization stuff, right? Using AI. And all these things, like I think I've like realized how built for insurance and built for reimbursement and billing that healthcare is, and the entire apparatus. I was thinking about doing like, I don't know what if this would just be a mini series or just an article or a Substack or something, but like there was kind of the explosion of the administrative state within healthcare, like came around, I want to say it was like the Clinton administration in the 90s, and there was these changes and reforms that they were making to healthcare. And a lot of them didn't even like go into full practice, but like basically the preparation and the planning and the movement in that direction, all these healthcare organizations had to plan for these like administrative changes to insurance and billing and this new paradigm. And so they like drastically staffed up like the administrative staff to handle all of that, like what they thought was going to be workload. And there was more workload, but like a lot of that ended up not even going into practice. But like if you look at a chart of like surgeons versus administrative personnel, when you're looking at a line graph, it looks like the surgeon line doesn't even move because the administrative line for the y-axis to catch it all is like so high.
You don't even need to see a chart because you go on their LinkedIn and you see how many people work in one hospital system. It's 20,000, 30,000 people. And you're just, you're saying to yourself, there has to be less patients than that.
I know. And I say all that to say this, innovation for hospitals and health systems is like really, really hard. But I honestly think it's because like people that are in the administrative layer, which is like growing, right? We talked about their jobs aren't innovation. They're not built for innovation. The processes and the systems they use, it's completely like a foreign thing. I would say it's a foreign thing, but it's also like almost adverse because it's like this innovation stuff kind of butts heads with like the more, blocking and tackling, insurance, reimbursement, billing, all of that. So it is really difficult. Like kind of the patient care, point of care lab, your stuff you're talking about, like I totally see the utility and the value, and more people need to be doing it. But I understand why it is difficult to come into an organization that's just like not built for that, right? And to try to get them to do that. But so I want to, on the patient specific implant piece, like, my, understanding of it, I think has like grown in the past bit, specifically in the spine space and looking at what they're doing with, spinal implants and patient-specific spinal implants. I think Carl's Med just had their IPO, and that's one of the big things that they do. But I'm going to oversimplify it and get it wrong here, and you can correct me or take an angle within this. So at its core, right, like you're taking an imaging of the anatomy, right, it's DICOM file, and then you're translating that at the endpoint output to a 3D CAD model for an implant. Right. So that within the patient specific implant world, right, are there kind of dividing lines in terms of the approach or modalities to get from that A to B right? When you're creating patient-specific implants, like, or do they all follow basically a similar framework, or is there another variable, or between that A and B, there's, some like kind of fundamentally emerging schools of thought or approaches that they take?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I'll do a quick walk through A to B. And if we're saying A is patient gets imaging and B is the implant is in the hand of the surgeon ready to be implanted, there's a lot more. There's A, B, A, C, there's a lot more in between there.
Yeah.
So what I would say is the first step is getting the imaging. Next step is some software or some engineer, whether it's manual or automatic. Some companies are using automatic segmentation. A lot of companies are using manual segmentation, maybe with some AI features to it, but mainly an engineer is sitting there segmenting. So by segmenting, it means a CT scan, for instance, comes in slices, whether it's 600, 1,000, whatever amount of slices that they are. And a good CT scan will be about a millimeter thick of a slice. And so basically what you have to use a software that will combine those slices to build a 3D model or build a 3D image. From that 3D image is what you can then work with. If you haven't built that 3D image, there's not much utility in those scans. So once you've built that 3D image, whether it's automatically or manually, you then have an engineer go through a surgical plan with the surgeon. Again, whether it's automatically creating some outline of that surgical plan using AI or starting from scratch, it depends. Some companies, run it one way. Other companies run it different ways. There's also companies whose only focus is surgical plan with the surgeon and get something like a surgical guide or a cutting guide as the output. They don't go as far as the implants. And what I would say is where you get a lot of divergence and where people really kind of move away from each other is what the workflow and what the process is for designing those implants. Because there are a whole host of engineering softwares, design CAD softwares that will help you. Whether you use Freeform or I know 3D Systems also has a lot of different softwares for cranial maxillofacial and cranial implants. But when we're speaking about orthopedics, there's not many options we have. And so I think a lot of companies have created proprietary software. So for instance, when we're talking about patient-specific implants, the gold standard, or at least the leader in the field right now for orthopedics is Restore 3D, they're the only ones that's their goal. Right? All the other companies have, let's say, a custom shoulder or a custom hip or a custom knee, and maybe they do tri-flange, whatever. But Restore 3D, their goal is just make patient-specific implants. And so from everything that I've learned from them is that they've created everything proprietary and everything internally. And so it's, I think that's where I believe that's going to be the future in allowing surgeons to plan their surgery and the output just being the implant. And you kind of not cut out the engineer, because the engineer will always be necessary to approve the designs, maybe make some small changes to the designs. But 5 years ago, when we were making custom implants, or 10 years ago, these were taking weeks because it was a lot of iterations, meeting back and forth with the surgeons and the engineers. And now I think it can all be done within a few days. And then you just have to worry about manufacturing. So lead times have been cut significantly. And I think we'll talk about it in a little bit, but the story of Conformis is a really very interesting case study on having a great product, but not having the wherewithal with getting that product commercialized, and really scaled.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting about, you can make a model of it, right? But then how do you translate that to, and how many hands do you put on like the actual getting to the implant design and then the manufacturing of it, but then kind of like branching off of that, right? Cutting guides, surgical workflow, all that stuff, which leads to adoption. As we both believe is like one of the bigger, harder parts of it. Yeah. And I know there's a couple companies that are doing this, some smaller, some bigger, around almost like the biomechanics of taking the patients, looking at it from like a stress, shear, load bearing, those elements, and then like having whether it's the topography or where there are trusses or thicker parts, or, the porous structure is more designed for load bearing versus like bony ingrowth and stuff like that, where they're kind of taking those biomechanic elements, right? Instead, it is geometric fit, but it's also kind of biometric load and stress and strain based calculations that are going into the actual kind of, I'll call it more superficial elements, but even like the kind of the structural elements. That's at least my read, some things that I've seen, but any takes on that?
No, I think biomimicry has been something that I've been super interested in. And I think that that's also the basis of where I fell in love with patient specifics, is because, we have these big clunky metal implants that were made or designed 10 years ago off the shelf and just thrown into the body. Whereas we have the ability to be mimicking the bone structure and allow for bone to be built into these implants. And some companies have integrated a lot of porous structures and been focused on, getting bony ingrowth and not just I think a lot of the movement towards cementless implants as well has been with the idea of more bony ingrowth and towards preserving more bone anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that biomimicry has been something that has been left in the dust and hasn't really been focused on in orthopedics, other than people trying to take the bony structures and trying to recreate them like cortical bone and the such as fixation goes.
Yeah. One quick question is just kind of my own curiosity. Are there, I imagine it's kind of like you can have a widget to put in there and it can be the most well-designed patient-specific thing. But like if you're not putting it in the right environment in terms of like the cutting and the removal of bone and different things like that, then it's like, okay, well, what are we really doing here, right? So are there almost like patient-specific cutting tools or patient-specific, I'm thinking burrs or different things, like is that something that exists, or is it kind of like they're all designed to be cut with, standard tools right now, and there wouldn't really be a reason to do anything custom on the tool side?
So I think on the tool side, like tools specifically, as you just mentioned, like burrs and saws, I'm not sure how important patient specifics is on that sense. But when I use the word surgical tools, I also include surgical instruments, because I would say that a cutting guide or a cutting block, as they used to be called, and as I see them now as 3D printed surgical guides, they're super valuable to the surgeon. I just spent, I have a few here. This is a knee cutting guide, and this was made directly for the patient. It fits exactly only in one specific spot and will ensure that the surgeon will stick the saw in this exact spot and make this the exact cutting plane that he planned to do. So it allows the surgeon to replicate their plan to perfection, barring any catastrophe during the preparation of the surgery.
Yeah.
So I would say that I think cutting guides, and with the advancements of 3D printing, with the advancements of automatic segmentation, as well as AI generated surgical guides to cut the cost down by a fraction, I think that's the future of a low cost way of getting precise surgical results. Now, when we're talking about these bigger budget places, that they're able to throw that capital expense at a robot, something like the Mako or a Velis, and they're really trying to get the most precise placement of an implant, I think we're still missing the main driver of the surgery itself, which is that the implants are what's going to prove whether or not the surgery is successful. So I think that the day that we can have a full integration of precise robots that will put the implant in the exact position with patient-specific devices and patient-specific implants themselves, that's a win-win-win, because you're getting the perfect placement, you're using the perfect implant, and the surgeon, in theory at least, as long as the surgery goes as planned, it should be the perfect surgery. And that should be the goal for our surgeons, for our VACs, for the hospital administrators, for everyone. The goal needs to be perfection, because as everybody in knee surgery at least knows, the proms are showing 20% of all patients around the world are unhappy with their implants, and so are unhappy with their outcomes. And so, there has to be at least a movement towards perfection, because right now, even if we can get it from 20 to 19 to 18 to 17%, we're improving close to 1 million people's lives because of the volume of number of surgeries that we're doing today.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So on that point about kind of the robotics and the Makos and all of that, kind of the AI centric, procedures that you're mentioning, how would you describe the current state of AI powered surgical planning like today? And how do you see it evolving over the next 5 years?
Yeah. I think AI specifically in surgical planning is going to move from something that's more of a supportive tool to really being a decision-making partner for the surgeons. Because right now the surgeons automate some things that are repetitive steps, like identifying landmarks, generating cutting planes, or templating implants. Templating, I think, was a big first step for them. And that's valuable, but it's still a very basic and it's very task-based, I would say. In the next 5 years, I think AI can really become much more predictive, and not just in predictive pre-planning, but also post-op. And you can maybe take imaging intraoperatively that will then tell you how we can expect the implant or the patient to succeed or fail over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. It'll actually be able to forecast the outcomes. I also think it will really help us with the movement towards, kinematic alignment. There's an entire field of argument and debate in orthopedics. And I think, obviously, I'm not a surgeon, but I've fallen closer to the kinematic alignment as that's more of a patient-specific ideal rather than mechanical alignment, which is what most surgeons pre-2015 and on, and before were taught, which is put everyone in a specific degree of alignment. And
can you crack that open a little bit, like kinematic versus mechanical alignment?
I'm going to put it on a very basic level because being not a surgeon, I'm not in the weeds of this argument as well. I really like the whole body holistically, but I'll be able to explain it in a basic
You're a pro
sense.
at this. You don't have to qualify,
okay,
man.
Cool.
You're a pro.
All right, you want to ask that question again then?
Yeah. So please, crack that open, the kinematic versus mechanical alignment. I feel like I've got I can kind of pick up what it means, but I want to hear it from you, what that actual kind of difference is.
Yeah, for sure. So mechanical alignment was what has been taught forever. And it's that you're essentially aligning every single one of your patients to what was perceived as the gold standard. So basically what announced is 7 degrees in varus or valgus, depending upon irrelevant of whether your patient was a large person, a small person, in every direction. And it didn't really matter. This was just what you were taught to do as a surgeon. Now, kinematic alignment is more if you want to restore what the patient's natural body was. So if they were 3 degrees in varus or 5 degrees in valgus, you're going to try to get them back to that position so that their ligaments are more used to that, I would say, degree of rotation or degree of position.
Yeah.
Now, what I would caution in that there's no, I would say, decisive factor, and there's nothing out there yet that says this is significantly better, other than, there are papers that show significance statistically, but there's no one school of thought that has won out just yet. Now, as I said, because kinematics has focused on the patient itself and when you're doing a kinematic alignment, you try to recreate what the patient's natural alignment is. I would say this is a more patient-specific approach. With that said, you're still putting in off-the-shelf parts. So the trochlear grooves and the tibial plateaus are not native to what the patients were before arthritis.
Yeah.
But that said, at least it's a start to moving towards patient specifics.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, 2 thoughts come out of that. It seems like kinematic has to be, in my mind, the way here. And not to say I think kind of the mechanical approach is wrong, but I think it's kind of without patient-specific implants and kind of some more modern technologies, all you really had as an option was a mechanical alignment approach, right? And with off-the-shelf implants. So it's kind of I understand why that was the school of thought. And the legacy school of thought is always going to have a prevailing dominance until it doesn't. But
interestingly enough, a company like Restore 3D, whose focus is patient-specific implants, where I think that, at least from the last time I checked and the last time I've heard them speak about it, they're still using mechanical alignment as what they focus on when they're trying to create a patient-specific knee. So it's more what they're creating in patient specifics is more on the mechanical and what they actually see, what the physical is. But they haven't moved, or at least from last time I heard them speak about it was back in December, and they haven't moved towards that kinematic alignment. So really gap balancing with the focus on the ligaments themselves and within the knee capsule, the patellofemoral area. So, I mean, I'd be interested. I think, again, that's a huge advancement in allowing that perfect patient-specific implant, because
we'll have to do another pod where we get us two and then somebody from Restore on, and we'll just dash this out because it's really interesting. Well, and so the first thing I was if all you've got is hammers and nails, right? That's what you can do. So I understand kind of the mechanical alignment approach there. But the other thought that I have, and again, just kind of going back to what I know, on the spine side, I feel like the, kinematic approach is 100% what is used, because even in the disc height that you're restoring, right? You're wanting to, degenerative disc disease, the disc compresses or flattens or whatever, you get a narrowing of the space. And typically you're going to go and try to restore height, right? But it's so, and I guess spine, maybe there's a lot more, people have completely different lordosis and pelvic tilt, and, their sagittal imbalance is XYZ all the way up the spine, right? And it also differs by age, et cetera. And there's different goals with surgeries, right? So, but all that to say, you've got your, vertically expanding implants, you've got your lordosis restoration implants and procedures and all of those things. And it seems crazy to me that you'd say like, oh, 60-year-old males should have,
Exactly. We follow the
8
playbook.
degrees of, 12 degrees of lordosis, and they came in with, 4, or they came in with like, so we're just going to get it back to this like one set standard. Seems kind of wild, but like, again, I understand it. So I'm glad we broke that down. That's really interesting. And I know they're growing in popularity, right? But like, why do you think, patient-specific implants like haven't gained more widespread adoption in orthopedics? Like even with the advancements in 3D printing, digital surgery, kind of AI-driven guides, things like that. Like, what do you think are the key barriers to preventing broader acceptance of these technologies?
Yeah. Well, I think that what the few things you just named are what's driving them to actually be picked up slowly but surely. I think there's a few things, but a major aspect of it is the regulatory process. Whether you're doing a 510K, an IDE, or a custom exemption, it's rigorous, and I feel companies are truly underestimating how much evidence, documentation, and clinical justification is needed. I really think, again, I know we spoke about it at the beginning, with regulatory aside, the hardest challenge is adoption. Surgeons and hospitals are cautious. They don't want to disrupt the workflows they already have unless the value for the patient and the value for their checkbooks is clear. That means a startup has to do more than just prove their safety and efficacy. They have to prove that the product improves outcomes, saves time in the OR, and really reduces cost. Now, there's a lot of evidence that proves all three of these. I wouldn't say a lot of evidence towards outcomes because we need more long-term studies for patient-specific implants, but definitely they've already proven that they save time, and they definitely save costs if you take into account the entire episode of care for a patient. Yeah. And then I would say market access also plays a big role in the fact that these large orthopedic players, they might offer a custom shoulder. They might offer custom hips for severe trauma or whatever, but they have entrenched sales forces with long-standing contracts and a lot of influence in these hospitals for off-the-shelf parts. I will like to say that they have hundreds of billions of dollars of implants in stock waiting to be implanted that they've already manufactured around the world. And, if all of a sudden the world said, we're no longer accepting off-the-shelf implants and we're only going to accept patient-specific implants, every one of these companies would be out of business because they would have way too much of that head cost. So I think that eventually we can slowly move towards it and we can start, chipping away at their market influence and their market capture, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I know that just by the nature of what it's going to take in order to really take hold.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great insight, and, it seems obvious, right? But that's good insight, as it seems obvious, like when you hear it, but it was unknown before. But no, that influencing factor is real with the big companies and kind of their entrenched, whether it's inventory, Salesforce, workflows, processes. To me, obviously, it feels like the tail wagging the dog, where it's like, okay, so like, the transition to better technology is being held up by checks notes, inventory considerations, right? But it's true. So to that point, though, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. And I think this will get to the point of like the adoption piece. I think you're a really well-suited person to kind of take this thing on. So I'm a value analysis committee, executive administration, whatever, at a hospital, right? And my knee guys and my hip guys and girls, right? They're doing these procedures. They're cranking, right? They're high volume. They're the most profitable part, maybe other than like neuro or cardio, right? But they're one of the most profitable procedures and OR suites in the entire health system, right? And they're doing that and driving that revenue and driving that case efficiency with off-the-shelf implants, right? So you're going to come in and say, okay, hey, we're going to swap out your off-the-shelf implants with a alternate workflow, with an alternate supply chain that is more just in time by the sheer nature of it, because it's patient specific. And, you're asking us to do all that. And maybe your implants cost the same. Maybe they're a little bit more, right? And maybe that procedure may take a little bit longer. Maybe it's the same. We don't know until we do it. How do you combat? What's the strongest kind of argument that you can make to say all of that may be true, but here is definitively kind of A, B, and C why you should do this and why it makes sense to make the transition for your, OR suite that's doing musculoskeletal?
Your focus is on value. You're saving money. No matter what, you have less implants to sterilize. You have less storage cost. And in addition, these implants, a lot of the time nowadays, because they're 3D printed, they can cost less. So that's the first step. Additionally, like you said, I think an issue that can come along in the future, and we'll have to work out supply chain issues, it is a just-in type of product, but that's something down the line. What I would say is we're also saving anywhere between 30 to 80 minutes in the OR, not having to make implant sizing decisions, just trying, basically you trial the implant that we plan to do, and that's it, because of the intense preoperative planning. So a surgeon who's cranking out 5 a day, if 5 a day means they're spending an hour and a half per surgery, and now all of a sudden they're saving 30 minutes per surgery, all of a sudden you could do 6 a day. So you're actually adding a full patient that you can operate on in a day in the same amount of hours, in the same amount of operating room hours. So that's an additional value that you can add. And then the last thing I'll say is the reason we're all in medicine and the reason we're all in patient care is because we want to improve patients' lives as efficiently and effectively as possible. And if only 80% of our patients worldwide are satisfied and in no more pain and like their knee replacement, that's still 20% of people. And at 2 to 3 million knee replacements a year, that is, I don't know, how good we are at math, that's over 500,000 people that are unsatisfied. And so if just our hospital, that leaves 1,000 people who are unsatisfied due to our volume. That means that if we can give them a better implant, a better surgery, a better workflow, one that's made for them. So this implant might not have 3 millimeters overhang for the knee replacement, or their hip replacement won't be in the wrong direction, I would say, then we can satisfy a lot of those issues. And even if we help 1 to 2% more, we're talking tens of thousands of patients. And this is just, again, by possibly saving time and by possibly saving money. But we're going to be breaking some of the longstanding contracts and the long-term partnerships we've had with large hospitals or with large companies.
Yeah, that was great. I'm sold.
Are you a VAC?
I'm sold. Yeah. I mean, if I was, I'd be sold. That was really good and compelling. I mean, and I think a lot of that too, it's like just fear of the unknown, and like change is
adoption.
Hard. I have a saying. Yeah, it's adoption, right? The fear of the unknowns that go along with adoption, and like people don't like change. Like I've said this a million times. Like the only people that like change are wet babies, right? So like it's just hard to get people to do anything at all that they're not already doing. Honestly, had a question about the balancing the promises of personalization with the reality of cost and complexity, but like honestly, you just like crushed that. So I'm gonna skip that question. That was really, really good. Maybe I'll replace that one though with a different question. So I know contracts are a big thing, and when, and that can be GPO contracts, but I think a lot of the time too, like, there's certain implants and certain things almost like kind of operate outside of like the traditional GPO, contract scheme. And maybe there's parts that do, parts that don't, whatever. But I think, in large part, those are more like physician preference items, right? And things like that. But I did want to ask, like, so there's a contract piece, but then I think like the reimbursement here is definitely a thing, and it definitely matters. Describe the current state of reimbursement for patient-specific implants, where you think it's going, and is it a barrier, right? Is it a headwind or a tailwind to adoption?
So patient-specific implants today are reimbursed as the same as any other implant, as an off-the-shelf implant.
And do you think they should be, right?
So I think reimbursement, everyone agrees, I would say, is broken in the US, just in general. But with that said, if you're providing more work, and even though we're working, we've done everything we possibly can to bring that cost of the implant down. We're providing a better implant, and it is requiring more work from the surgeon itself, because an off-the-shelf implant, you might just have to template, you might plan a little bit. But for a patient-specific implant, the surgeon has to go and do a full plan, meet with an engineer, and really do the work that's necessary to create the perfect implant. While, again, these companies are doing everything they can to take that burden, that time burden off the surgeon, bring it down to what it would take to just template. There is still more work done by the surgeon. And again, that doesn't take into account 3D printed surgical guides in addition, because I know a lot of companies have had struggle getting those reimbursed as an additional step, an additional tool, not even to speak to anatomical models. I was at a meeting of members of RSNA, and their push to and their fight to get anatomical models to be fully reimbursed, whereas they were being reimbursed at $57, where they can prove that they should be reimbursed upwards of $1,000 or $2,000. And so that's the reason why a lot of hospitals had pushback on, why do we need a point of care lab? We have these anatomical models that we can generate for, let's say, $100. They can only reimburse for $50. This isn't a feasible thing for us to do. We can have our lab for fun projects, but we're not going to be basically spreading it wide scale throughout the hospital or the system. So I think reimbursement is going to be something that needs to be fixed and needs to be tailored to patient-specific implants, because as last week, Restore 3D got another $100 million injection from a private equity firm. Patient-specific implants aren't going anywhere. All the main players now. Stryker has their shoulder. Exactech also. Zimmer has their knees. Patient-specific implants are going to be the future, whether it's in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Reimbursement better get on board, or else there's going to be some issues.
Yeah, I think Wu-Tang said cash rules everything around me, right? So it's like, it's all the incentive structure, right? It's like, you want to see those big companies move harder at, the patient-specific implants, just like make them reimburse 10% higher. And they're going to see that as like, oh, that's 10% revenue I could get, or 10% higher, right? I also, last point on this, I'll keep rolling with the questions though. Like, I forget who I was talking about this with. I think maybe it was Jeff June on the last pod, but like, people don't realize too that the average patient for a health insurance provider, like this is employer-based, doesn't matter, is only on the plan for like 2 to 3 years, right? Before they will transition from like Blue Cross to United, or from United to somewhere else. And we're talking about implants that, like you talked about the long-term duration, the studies needed, right? You're talking about like everything's probably going to be fine for the first 2-3 years. And then you start to see issues and things. And by that time, not their problem, that patient's on another person's health plan. So like, I do understand. And again, reimbursement's broken, insurance and payer system in the US is also broken, right? But like, so I understand them saying, why would I reimburse 10% higher a patient-specific implant that's going to help the patient in 5 years or 15 years have a better outcome?
They're no longer my customer. They're no longer my patient.
They're no longer my customer. And it's like, that's obviously removing kind of the patient-centric altruistic side of healthcare aside, but that's the system we live in with insurance companies. I'm curious, that kind of like average patient derollment being 2 to 3 years, like if that, plays a role in your mind, or like
surely that plays a role. I find it very interesting because I was just talking to a colleague of mine a few days ago, and we were talking about Stryker just came out. So Stryker has a knee system called Triathlon. They just came out and said 10-year follow-up, 99% survivorship. It's just stark and shocking because nothing in orthopedics specifically you could say 99% survivorship, 10 years. It's shocking, and if it's true, that's amazing. But now let's see 12 and 15 years after that, because that's where the issues arise. Not the first 10 years. If you don't, if it doesn't fail in the first year or two, you're not going to have failure until you have that wear, until you have that 10, 12, 15-year wear. So it's very nice that you have 10-year survivorship, but at 15 years, I want to know what the survivorship is. So in speaking to that, okay, if 97 or 98% of the patients aren't getting revised within a year or two, which is what what their average is saying, but in 15 years, you're at 80 or 70% are surviving, then you have an issue. But like I said, I don't think it wouldn't play a role. But if the insurance companies are thinking that meta, that they're thinking our customers or our policyholders aren't going to be with us in 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. I think they have to think more on the average. So even if they get rid of one knee surgery patient, they're going to get another one anyway. So
yeah, no, and it's tough. Like, I don't know how you like systemically or like create a structure that like has like some level of like reach back or pull through, or like claw back to where it's like, hey, but ultimately, like, they're just the ones reimbursing it. So they're like, well, we're just reimbursing it. But like, they are so drastically influencing the decision-making process around the care that's provided and the tools that are used and the implants that are used, that like they are responsible, right? Like in a macro sense for that patient, what was used, the choice of all of that. So that 15-year survivorship, they are absolutely, but like, I don't know how you could attach some monetary benefit or penalty to, hey, when this covered life for you 10 years ago, got this procedure, and like there's, I mean, to a degree, like, health systems are almost penalized in that way if you have readmissions and 60-day and 30-day readmissions and things like that. And but anyway, that's a ball of wax.
One thing that I think, I'm sure a lot of your viewers and a lot of people know, but I want to make sure that it's obvious and that it's clear and out there, in that everyone knows the average lifespan has gone up over the last 5, 10, 20, 50 years. And on top of that, our activity levels have also gone up as we get older. And so the 40-year-old today is more active than the 40-year-old, is possibly more active than the 40-year-old 50, 60 years ago. Now, the point of that is that we're needing to have these knee replacements or these hip replacements or these shoulder replacements at younger ages, and yet these implant survivorship rates have improved over the last 20 years, but they've not gotten to the point of perfection, and they have not gotten to the point where they last you the lifetime. So no
Yeah.
matter what, if you get that knee surgery or that hip surgery that's going to take you 6 months or 3 to 6 months out of whatever activity you're doing, all of a sudden in 10, 12, 15, 18 years at the best, you're getting that revised. And then you're out again for 60, for 3 to 6 months. And now you're older. So now it really is that high end 6 month mark. And it's not the best we can do. And why not
Yeah.
do it right the first time? I was always told by my parents, by my teachers, by my coaches, do it right the first time. You won't have to do it again. And I think
Yeah.
we are okay, at least in an industry level, we're okay with doing it again because we're saying, oh, it survived for 18, 20 years. It's fine.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'm going to move on to some like market dynamics
No
and
problem.
like commercial strategy questions. But last point about that, because you said something, talked about like we are having patients that are needing these procedures earlier. And I would say maybe say like we do have patients that are needing intervention earlier. But I wanted to ask you, and I know you talked to Brad at Cytex Ortho, but like in that space of, not a total knee replacement or not a total hip replacement, what are there interventions for the, we'll call it like below 50 or 55 or whatever, right? Like that window where you're like, you could have a really, really awesome performing hip or knee implant, and you're still going to have to get a revision just because of all the variables that you mentioned. Are there technologies or interventions, or like what's your stance on those things that are short of full implant replacement that we should be doing, investing more in, thinking more about in terms of prolonging the kind of prolonging that period prior to your initial replacement?
I think at the highest level of this, it's tissue engineering. It's wow, okay, really making advancements on design engineering, and these implants are getting amazing. But if we can integrate tissue engineering and bioengineering into these implants and not necessarily have to do a full replacement. So for instance, like what Brad is doing, as well as, there's a lot of research into, so if you have just unilateral, like if you just have one-sided or unicondylar arthritis on one of your knees, there's a way to inject tissue cells to possibly promote the regrowth and improve your knee. I think it's something that has been going on. And also you hear, athletes like LeBron James or whoever have gone out overseas to get PRP injections in their joints. Seemingly it works. LeBron James is a 43-year-old player, best player in the NBA, up there at least. It's pretty amazing. But I think there's definitely other options. I mean, we need to look at joint replacements, and I think people do. And I think the surgeons or at least orthopedists do see total joint as, the last option, as something that, okay, we've gone through physical therapy, we've gone through injections, whatever they may be, and then joint replacement is what has to be done with severe arthritis or severe trauma. But I don't know. I think tissue engineering is going to be the way of the future as it relates to options away from full surgery. But you're still going to really need to integrate that stem cell aspect or tissue engineered aspect to it.
Yeah, and I think my view is like this is all inclusive, right? Like we need to be doing all of it because, again, there may be across the interventions that are, short of surgical replacement, there's kind of like patient derived or patient specific intervention, right? Where it's like, well, this person, because of maybe it's their genetic makeup, may be better suited for this, or this person because of their, current bone health and, the overall health of, maybe it's like, hey, they had this injury in sports and otherwise very like there just may be things about the patients from a patient specific and holistic care standpoint where it's like this early intervention needs to be tried, or this one, and we think it can prolong it because even 10 years is a big deal.
I want to move on like you said, but I want to give one shout out real quick to one of my professors, Dr. Hung, Columbia University, studied tissue engineering forever, and he taught me something that was absolutely shocking, and every single person in the class was shocked. It was that every knee injury increases your chance of arthritis. So I've always been of the thought that arthritis is genetic and it's upbringing, but literally every time you bang your knee or have any trauma to that area, the fact the blood cells are rushing there will then bring on in the future, or even slower or slowly, but will bring on arthritis. So it's unbelievable that you tear your ACL and you're like, all right, we fixed my ACL, amazing. But the fact that you had an ACL tear at the age of 21, your percent chance of having severe arthritis by the age of 50 or 60 is exponential compared to someone who didn't tear their ACL, even though the bone or the cartilage itself might have been unaffected. And it's just because of the amount of inflammation and the way that our joints are created and the way that our joints
Yeah.
exist in the blood flow aspect of things. It's amazing.
Yeah. So you're telling me when I was 17 and playing defensive back and got pancaked by a lineman and tore my meniscus a little bit.
It might play a role in your
probably
future arthritis. I'm sorry to tell you.
Great. Excellent. I'm so glad I did that. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So on to kind of next set of questions. So let's talk about like entering the US market, right? Like what are the biggest challenges for medtech companies if they're expanding, when expanding into the US market?
Say that one more time. Did you ask what are the biggest challenges?
Yes. Yeah. So what are the biggest challenges for medtech companies when they're expanding into the US market?
I would say specifically I don't want to bring us back to adoption, but regulatory issues are one thing, but it's surgeon education and ensuring that your product is fully understood, because you can make LinkedIn posts, you can go to the surgeon and speak to them once or twice, but if they don't understand the value of your product and how it improves patient outcomes or how it improves patient surgeries as well, then it's not going to be a successful adoption. And so, for instance, I've spoken to a company who's working on a new and innovative total wrist arthroplasty. And, they really want to show how much better or how improved they are in comparison to the current market and currently what's being sold. And, there's a way to show the surgeon, hey, this is what you're doing. This is actually what you're not doing. Specifically as it relates to total wrists, there's very, very few total wrists arthroplasties being done because of how high the failure rate is and how poor the performance is of total wrist arthroplasties. But trying to convince these surgeons now, hey, I know over the years you've been taught this is a last case scenario. We really don't want to put arthroplasty, totally replace the wrist joint, but there is actually a way to do this correctly. And we can prove it to you. And why don't you just try it? So I think surgeon education is probably the biggest factor for ensuring that you can have adoption within hospital systems. In addition, just really getting to those innovation partners. I know we spoke about it at the beginning, how they're not necessarily focused directly on internal innovation. They are focused on external innovation in the hospitals. So if you can get in front of those innovation directors and show them, hey, here's my product. Here's why I think this is successful, and here's the value, and here's where we can bring patients to a better state of being, basically.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. This is like not too dissimilar, but maybe what I would say in terms of the biggest challenges, and this is like from the perspective of maybe like somebody that's like, maybe they've started in Europe or whatever, started in another country, and they're really trying to expand to the US market, would be like picking your battles and like picking your customers and who you're going after. Because I think people generally think about healthcare as like, oh, it's our healthcare system, or it's like, oh, here's a hospital. This hospital's like that hospital, right? And this surgeon's like that surgeon. But like, are they single source, dual source, multi-source with their contracts? Do they have kind of like a flat open bid process where it's like, we pay this for the implant and like bring it on? Like if you can meet that price, what's their GPO contract? How long have they been with that GPO? What's the relationship there? Are they single source, dual source with the GPO? Who's their insurance payer, right? How do they reimburse these types of procedures and things like that? Like, what's the surgeon's volume, right? What percent are they doing ASC versus hospital outpatient department versus inpatient and all these things? Like, I think it's really difficult to like truly dig in and understand all those variables and then like make it an efficient part of your sales enablement and targeting process. But like you can wait with how long the sales cycles are too. Like you can waste so much 6 months, 9 months, a year longer on the wrong customers
and the wrong strategy.
And it's like you just barking up the wrong tree forever. And it's like you would be so much better off if you say you went to 20 customers and you were like, hey, 10 of these, based on all of these kind of variables and things, there's just not alignment here for our solution right now in this kind of early adopter innovator stage. So we're just going to cut these 10 and focus on these 10. You would be so much better off doing that and end up with more customers faster than like just trying to broadly go after 20 or 30 or 40 because they're a big name or because some other thing that like really brass tacks isn't going to move the needle for your adoption.
One thing that I've started to really enjoy doing is qualifying the leads. And how, you have your leads, but you don't. It's not about the quantity of leads. So I can come up with 100 leads or 100 different potential buyers of a specific software, the specific product or whatever it be, but really ensuring that the leads are going to be wanting the product. So, without going too much into the details of it, there's a product that out there, it's 90% of people who want to complete this task are using one specific product in the hospital. And there has to be a way to, even though another product might be 3 times less the cost, give you the same value, but you still run into the issues of, this is the product I've been using for 10, 15 years this is the product I was trained to use, and this is the product that I'm going to die using, basically. And it doesn't matter if your product is exactly the same, costs a third of the price, I'm still going to use this product. And so it's so interesting trying to figure out who are the people who aren't going to tell me that, and trying to figure out is who do I really need to talk to and find out. And then on top of that, once you do make that first sale, once you do have that first crack in the ice, learning from those experiences and figuring out what went well right here. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out, and how we can replicate that for everyone, because everyone has the capacity to say, yeah, sure, I'll try your product, but most people don't. And we need to figure out why.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And to the point about qualifying leads, quick shout out to Alpha Sophia, awesome data intelligence platform, CPT, DRG, like data, where the surgeon went to school, what they like on their, turkey sandwich, everything about, so quick shout out to them. I use it, religiously to like qualify leads. So great one there. Next question. So from a global markets perspective, right? Like, are you seeing different levels of adoption for patient specific implants in different regions? Like, what's driving those differences? Is it regulatory, reimbursement, cultural, or something else?
So I would say this, the idea of patient specific implant is not just restrictive to orthopedics, right? Because I would say that we are the last bastion. Orthopedics is the last bastion to really take it on in terms of the physical and the mechanical type of surgery, because cranial maxillofacial, pretty much that's what they do. They do patient specific work. That is the gold standard, and that's how it's taken. Orthognathic surgeries as well, especially with like the fibular flap surgeries. That is what should be done for all of those specific indications. Now, that's being done heavily in Europe. Specifically, there's 3 or 4 companies that are patient-specific focused are out of the Netherlands and Belgium. So those EU companies are really trying to spread throughout Europe. The gold standard, the top of the line point of care lab is out of Switzerland in Basel. They have, they're putting out all the papers. They're putting out, pushing forward all the hospitals. That's not to speak of Dr. Morris at the Mayo Clinic, but they're really focused on implants rather than just modeling and cutting guides. Yeah. So I would say Europe is that place that they're really focused and really trying to get patient-specific implants off the ground. It's interesting. Last year I had the honor of being able to attend. It's called Personalized Arthroplasty Society. It's a society of all orthopedic surgeons. And the reason why I wanted to go is, it's personalized medicine, personalized orthopedics. It's great, but their focus is more on like the argument between kinematics and mechanical alignment. A lot of them are still, and I'm like, you're not focused on the right thing. You're focused on, I'm really glad you're trying to perfect the surgery, but we can also be adding for a call to patient-specific implants. That's neither here nor there, but a lot of the movement in just patient-specific implants has been in cranial maxillofacial, CMF, obviously cranioplasty, whenever there's a large craniotomy. Yeah. But, I really think, I'm hoping that this $100 million towards Restore 3D really puts the pedal to the metal and allows them to grow as, not stop growing and not hit that plateau of, okay, we're a big enough company, we can stop here. I want them to take on the Strykers and the Zimmers and the Smith & Nephews and take that 5-10% market share of total knees, of total hips, because they deserve it. Yeah. Not they deserve it, but patient specifics deserves it. And whoever's going to be the one to take that market share, it's only going to be exponential from there, because people are going to see the long-term outcomes. They're going to see, I hope so, at least. I'm not going to speak to the clinical efficacy of things, but yeah. No, that's great. So different kind of set of questions here, industry evolution, future outlook type stuff. How do you see the relationship between robotics and implants evolving in the future? Like, are robotic systems driving implant choices, or implants still the primary factor influencing robotic system adoption? How do you see those two playing? So obviously, I think I touched on it earlier that robotics has to be used in line with patient-specific implants, or else we're basically just using a GPS without connection, essentially allowed to use a GPS without a car. and we're walking everywhere. This is in relation to obviously using a map, which is manual.
Yeah.
Now, I think until we're able to utilize all of the tools that are at our fingertips together, we're not doing things fully effectively. We're not using the tools to our benefit. We're just kind of stringing things along and hoping, that things work. That's not to say that robotics isn't an amazing leap forward, because it is. Now we have the ability to put the implant in the precise position that we want to put it. That's amazing. But the next step has to be perfecting the implant that we're placing. It has to be. If not, we're just patching the holes. We're just fixing, let's say, maybe we're going from a prom of 20 to 19%, and we need to do better. We have to do better. And again, I'm just speaking about knees and hips really, but shoulders are there as well. I think Mako just came out with their shoulder robot, and people are buying it left and right. I think it's awesome. But Stryker also has a patient-specific shoulder. And if they're not going to be trying to sell that as the implant to use with their precise robot, why are they selling the precise robot?
I'd be shocked if they aren't, or it's not on like the immediate roadmap. Yeah. And to that point though, I mean, I feel this is something I've seen like kind of in spine, and I'm sure this exists too, but like you've got a bit of this kind of structural lockout where it's like, oh, we have the knee robot, right? It's the, Stryker, Mako or whatever. And so like the ability to integrate, restore or whatever patient specific implant, right? Like with that robotic approach is going to require some level of cooperation or collaboration to integrate, their existing robotic system with these new patient-specific implants and cutting guides and surgical planning and all of that stuff. So, like, is that something that you see? Like, am I reading that correctly? Is that a barrier?
Yeah, so it is obvious. It's a barrier because you have companies who are implant-specific. So, for instance, Stryker's Mako is going to will forcibly only work with a Stryker implant. But then you have companies like Think Surgical who they don't have their own implant. They just sell robots. And they're able to work with pretty much any other company's implants who might not have a robot or who might not be as confident in their robot. And so I think Surgical they went public, I don't remember how long ago, but
yeah, they
are, I think, the gold standard for putting themselves in the position to be adopted by patient-specific implants, because they are implant non-specific and they can be used with, as long as you have an initial agreement with them, they can be used to implant any kind of implant as long as the planning is done correctly. So I think they're ripe for the taking with working with those patient-specific companies.
Yeah, and shout out, Essential Robotics is doing that on the spine side, where they've got like a spine-specific robot that is implant hardware fixation agnostic.
Yeah, that was the word I was looking for, agnostic.
yeah, very like open source kind of app store approach, and like I think it's the move. I think it's where things need to go. And I go
is that
back,
also a handheld one, or is that a big?
It's a full system. They've got nav and robot, but I go back and like healthcare is always full of these, but it's just like we want to optimize the supply chain, and we only want to have one or two vendors that we work with for all this stuff. So we're going to take the consolidated, constricted approach to say, okay, the Mako robot and, only Mako implants, and like that's what our surgeons have to use or whatever. And again, this is taking nothing away. I know it's an amazing robotic system and I know it's amazing implant system, right? But it's kind of like you are, by virtue of adopting that system, like limiting the level of competition that you're allowing to come into your hospital and limiting the options for patients, right? And look, if those big companies start to say, hey, we're going to have integration capabilities, whatever, like that'd be great, but they're never going to do that because it's going to cut down on their implant sales, which is the big driver of revenue. So it's these things where it's like, yes, this sucks, but like I get it, right? And it's just kind of like one of those things that you have to deal with. I mean, and this is true with car manufacturers and all these different things, right? So this is not specific to healthcare, but specifically on kind of the I heard from a distributor the other day, they were like, yeah, we've got these hospitals and health systems are going to, moving from like, trying to consolidate down to like 5 vendors for everything. It's like Medline, J&J, that, right? And it's like, good gosh, it's like, what are the,
again, what are the small companies? And also, but what is the goal?
Again, it built for, it's a financial machine and a money-making operation built for insurance reimbursement and administrative efficiency.
And I know a lot of your listeners know this already, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, there's hospital systems now that are owned by private equity firms and hospital systems.
Of course.
So, and again, what the goal of a private equity firm is to make money, and they will do whatever they can to make that money. And again, I don't think that meshes well with a hospital, with a patient care facility. I don't understand how that goes through.
I know. We
can have a whole other conversation about that. But I did want to talk one last thing about, because you did touch on the idea that, these big companies they're not investing in patient specifics. They all have Stryker, Zimmer, J&J, Smith & Nephew. They all have, digital surgery platforms. They all have invested in planning softwares with, Stryker at Blueprint, navigations, even some patient-specific solutions. But for whatever reason, their pace is much slower than most of the people who are arguing, or at least bringing up these points that I bring up, as we would like. I think I alluded to it before, but the challenge is that they're built on the legacy business models, that their profitability comes from those standard implants that they're sold at scale, and personalization in their eyes doesn't fit neatly into that model. And so I think it's really going to take a big push. And that's why I started my podcast is, even if I convince one person, that one person might be able to convince 5 people, because I think that there needs to be that push towards not accepting what's good enough, because you hear these, at least legacy surgeons, say it works good enough. We need to expect perfection, because we see surgeons as these, amazing geniuses that they are. But I think the tools that we're giving them are not allowing them to be perfect.
Yeah, it's also, final point on this, and then got another question, and we'll do some rapid fire before we close out. I'd also be remiss, I feel like, in this whole paradigm that we're talking about, if we didn't mention these really large companies also have essentially unlimited funds to pay for speaking fees and design consulting sessions in the Alps and all of this stuff to, have their surgeons that are still using the off-the-shelf stuff just go talk about how great they are, right? And then contribute to designs for the next off-the-shelf version or whatever, right? So there is and you can look at this data, the open payments data, you can see it on Alpha Sophia, the hundreds of millions, probably billions, even just in the musculoskeletal, that the largest, 8 companies pay in, consulting fees and royalties and travel and speaking fees and, sponsoring podium presentations. And so that engine, I've always struggled with you can do good research and you can have your KOL get up there on the podium, but there's a lot of that drives behavior. And it's just I don't know how small companies really combat
even
that.
Even a normal volume surgeon can generate, a normal volume surgeon who does maybe 150, 200 surgeries a year. That's even low volume, I would say. But no, it's about average actually. But they'll generate millions of dollars for a company just by doing the surgery with their implant. So if they invest $500,000 or $250,000 or $150,000 to get the surgeon to say, I'm going to use your implant for the year, that payoff is insane. The markup is insane on their value, so on their profit, I should say. It's very interesting. It works like anything else in America, honestly.
Yeah, maybe one of the answers is companies that are small companies entering the commercial stage. Maybe we should just be budgeting more for speaking fees and KOL fees and stuff.
Paying surgeons off to use our product. Yeah.
No, that's not what it's called, Jonathan. Sorry. It's called educational advancement. Yeah. Last question, then we'll do some rapid fire. Yeah. So what trends in personalized orthopedics are you most excited about?
I love what Zimmer is doing with their smart implants. Obviously, I like technology. I love moving forward and being able to gain insights into how the patient is doing. But
what do you mean? What are they doing with smart implants?
Yeah, so they have sensors essentially. I know there's one in the tibial side. I'm not sure of the one on the femoral side, but that will be able to test out the stresses that's happening on the bone, and being able to predict outcomes of the success of that implant as well, possibly even before the patient feels pain. And it also will just add to the growth, the ML growth, I would say. So to feed that information on outcomes from the patient, feed that into some algorithm, some software that's going to improve the implant design in the future. Again, we're talking about improve the off-the-shelf implant design in the future, but maybe that will also lead to some information going into the pipeline of a patient-specific. In general, I love the idea that we're finally putting sensors in. I think another aspect of that is the modularity of specific implants.
I was just about to ask you about that. Keep going.
I did an episode of that. I think that was episode 2 or 3, I think, of my podcast, but it's basically it allows a surgeon to make changes. There's a shoulder implant. I can't remember which company it was. I apologize to that company if you wanted a shout out. But there's a company that if the implant is not fitting correctly, let's say a week or two post-op, they have a very quick and easy fix to make a sizing change or adjust the direction or the angle of the implant, the version of the implant, whatever it may be. And that ability to make those changes. And I've also heard of companies using ultrasound to be able to make those changes post-op. And so I just think really finally integrating the technology that we've invented over the last 100 years. I mean, there's been no other 100 years where we've had this amount of technology. We need to use the technology, and obviously there's a way to overuse it. I think that's definitely needs to be, up there in a priority. We need to not overuse the technology, but if we can give better outcomes to our patients, we need to be using the technology.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about is like, there's almost like a middle ground between like the legacy off the shelf and then patient specific, where it's like, the central 70% or whatever is off the shelf. And so the custom element is just manufactured as, call it an insert, bolt on.
That type of modularity is very cool as well. For sure.
Yeah, like more topography and whatever based. Every procedure's case by case, but like I do see that as like really interesting. To where you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, where it's like we get the high scalability of like we're making one SKU, but then there's modular, here and here.
That's been around for 20, 30 years. It's been perfected as of late, but the modularity aspect of things, it has been around at least.
Yeah.
I mean, by the Savage stem was one of the first modular implants. That was from the 70s and 80s. So,
yeah. So, final question here, and then I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up. So for the medtech innovators and entrepreneurs out there, like what's one piece of advice that you wish someone had given you when you were starting your journey? And what's one thing that could have been really impactful you'd like to share with people?
I think you need to be open to learning in every scenario, because I had this obsession with orthopedics. But COVID hit and there was basically a hiring freeze in every single aspect of orthopedics. And I said, I'm still going to go out there and learn as much as I can in terms of medtech product development, medtech commercialization. And so I went there and I worked for not an orthopedic company, but a medtech company that was going to help me with learn my product development skills and learn my commercialization skills. So the first thing I would say is don't just silo yourself into this. I want to work in orthopedics, or I want to work in spine, or I want to work, spine is orthopedics, but I want to work in some aspect of medicine. And then you're just stuck. You're kind of just stuck there and you don't learn much of anything else. But I joined 3 different startups, and all 3 of them, I'm able to wear a bunch of different hats. I'm not just the engineer. I'm not just the test engineer. I'm not just the design engineer. I'm the design engineer who also has to do a financial analysis, or a mechanical engineer who also needs to do some electrical work. And so being able to work at these small startups where you're wearing a whole bunch of hats, you learn so many skills that are so useful in the future. And then you could also have a wider range of places that you can work at and positions you can take because you have that experience. So I'm a mentor at my undergrad college at University of Florida. I'm part of a mentorship program. And what I'll always tell them is if you have the option between a big company and a startup, I would say at least your first job, go to the startup, because you'll be able to learn much more faster. And then you're going to be an asset for those bigger companies in the future.
Yeah. 100%. Like kind of, especially early in your career, like be a sponge and try to develop skill sets that either you have an aptitude for, or you just think like could potentially be helpful. And just AI is one of those for me. If you're not learning it, if you're not trying to use it, but like you were saying, whether it's software development or, really digging into like the regulatory or the reimbursement side, like being a multi-tool athlete and creates kind of, honestly, it's like so sticky. It's like you're the glue guy on projects because you can translate across these different disciplines, and it's like couldn't be more valuable. And like I know a lot of people that are just like really successful just because they're not the best at any one thing, but they're really damn good at like 4 or 5 different skill sets or whatever, and it just makes them like undeniably great.
Why wouldn't you want to be Shohei Ohtani?
Exactly. This was a home run of an episode, Jonathan. I really appreciate it. For everybody that tuned in, Jonathan Swill, principal consultant at Surgical Excellence Partners. If you stuck around this whole time, thank you. But if you stuck around this whole time, you can see what like an absolute pro Jonathan is in this space, in the medtech world in general, but like specifically in the musculoskeletal space. So we'll put his contact info everything, how to get in touch with him, podcast, the series that he has. We'll put all that in the show notes. And I'll just close with this, Jonathan. This was so intellectual stimulating for me and just so fun. So really appreciate you joining me.
I mean, it was just as intellectually stimulating as the episode we didn't record, just us together when we were just chatting. So, I really appreciate your time, Spencer, and I really appreciate the community that you've built. I can't wait to keep digging deeper into Exo Medtech and keep learning from the different guys and gals you got in the field.
Yeah.
Because
I think we're like 270 members now. It's crazy.
Unbelievable. And that's it. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak to you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, and for everybody that tuned in, thank you again, and hope you have a great rest of your day. See ya. Take care, Jonathan.
See ya.